everybody. Good to see you all. Day 24. So for the next 4 days, I'm going to be practicing alongside you, and we're going to get right into sort of the technique at its most intense expression, which would mean you're inhaling for as long as possible, you're holding your breath for as long as possible, you're exhaling for as long as possible, and you're holding your breath, again, with nothing in your lungs for as long as possible. And as you sort of accumulate CO2, all of you are familiar with that experience at this point. As you accumulate CO2, chaos is going to seep into your count. It's going to seep into your ability to perform the exercise. But just let that manifest. If the inhale is panicked and erratic, if the exhale, quivers, if your posture, if you find yourself like adjusting because of discomfort, let all of those, suggested techniques and suggested sort of etiquettes break down, and just stay loyal to maximum intensity. Because the idea is you're trying to pull in as much CO2 as possible within your body to create as much internal physiological change, which will sort of domino into maximum neurological change. And when you come back to the meditation at the very end, when you relinquish Kumbhaka and then you're just sitting there breathing normally, your body is going to slingshot into its homeostasis, into what is regular. And what you'll find is what is most comfortable, what is so comfortable it is now perceived as bliss. And so I just want to take a second before we get into all of that to really dissect our ritual at this point. The opening breaths are committed to dukkha, to suffering, and to your posture, and to finding your space. And then we have kumbhaka. And then last session, I introduced this sort of arms up and over the head thing. So just getting into some details of that. And then the final point with KAIVALYA and appreciating aloneness. And so the whole point of this, why are we performing this exercise? And what is the point of Pranayama? And I've shared this before, but it is to obliterate the thought process. But what does that really mean, and why would we want to obliterate the thought process? It means that we are obliterating our perception or our preference sets. And so when we look out into the world, we've collected a highly advanced and nuanced set of preferences that filters the world into good and into bad, and it's not so stark into I like this, and I like this more than I like that other thing, and I like this less than I like that other thing. And because we're human beings and we can imagine things that are not real, we can imagine where we will be in the future, what could have been, what should have been, we also compare our reality, which is already, fragmented into preference sets, against ideal realities or less ideal realities. So it's not even like we're interacting with what's in front of us. And this hierarchy, this enmeshment of the world into our preferences and vice versa, plagues us. And so a core tenet of most spiritual practices is this advice that your problem, my problem with the world, whenever a problem does arise, is not actually what you are observing. It's not actually the problem in front of you, it's what you perceive the problem to be. And the real issue is the mind. For this reason, meditation is sort of fostered and cultivated over centuries, and those that commit to it find a way outside of those preferences or outside of the influence of those preferences for short whiles, for short bursts. And when they do find themselves out of their preferences or out of their minds, what they behold, what their eyes have always seen but their mind couldn't really savor, and what their ears have always heard but their minds couldn't listen to, what they behold is the stuff of legend. What they behold is something so magnificent, so enchanting, and so familiar, which makes it even more sort of ironic and poetic, that those experiences sort of live on as legend and inspire the next wave and next generation of meditators to commit to it. And so, that's why we're here. And so why am I sharing this? When you are committing to dukkha, when you are committing to your suffering in the beginning of the session, it isn't all doom and gloom. What you're essentially saying is, I acknowledge there's suffering in me, and I acknowledge that I think a situation within me or outside of me is generating pain or generating confusion or generating fear. And then the secondary thought is, but I know that is not true because I have the faith that all things are blissful, all things are divine, all things are supremely good. What I know now as a meditator, someone who chooses to embody these beliefs, is my suffering, my dukkha, is the consequence of my perceptions of said thing. And so really when you're sitting there in the beginning of your session and breathing in deeply and acknowledging this misperception, is you're acknowledging that that suffering is illusory, it is unreal, and you and I, all of us, need enough energy to make our way out of its propaganda. Okay, and so I think it's a nuance, but it's really important to understand and to feel when you're opening your practice. And then we'll get into Kumbhaka. And so what does Kumbhaka do? Theoretically, philosophically, we are collecting energy to escape the gravity of our perceptions, the intense pull and the intense magnetism of our own beliefs. And so what is that energy, and how can you sort of fixate on it, especially as you get into this like intense expression of our exercise? When you're holding your breath, let's say at the bottom retention, that's the most difficult. And it's like, oh my God, I'm here again. All of these feelings. There's this flash of thoughts that are, sort of negative, I would say, to put it simply. As everything intensifies, right, as your body tightens, as your stomach starts to pulse, as your ribs start to seize spontaneously, as it all intensifies, pay attention to one tiny point, that in that moment of maximum intensity, there is nothing in your thought process but that moment, right? So you are hyper present because it is supremely intense. And in that hyper presence, there is pure focus. And so nothing exists but you and the reality of your inner body. And because yogis have done away with duality, there is no good, there is no bad anymore. All that matters is consciousness and the intimacy between consciousness and any given experience. Because of the intensity of this entire situation, negative to like an outsider's perspective, Kumbhaka is extraordinarily valuable in giving a practitioner the real-time physical experience of dharana, D-H-A-R-A-N-A, dharana, which is supreme focus. You're so intently committed conceptually or intellectually through your attention on this one thing that you essentially fuse with it and the whole world disappears. And so again, what you want to pay attention to every single round, especially that bottom retention, is that the intensity correlates to maximum focus. And that in that, every time you're holding your breath for longer and longer, you are essentially pulling the pearl of pure awareness out of your mind and sort of, building a relationship to it. And so the idea from there is that because you spend all this time in such intense focus, that you can call upon it later in your life. And that lines up with neurology. Every time you hit that extreme focus, parts of your brain fire, and every time they fire, they are likely to fire more in the future. And so focus on that at the end. And then this last little ritual, okay. Arms reach up and overhead, you've inhaled. You interlace your fingers, index fingers point up to the sky. This is called Shiva Mudra. So you're here and you're holding your breath. And so what I've found, besides just sort of like the beauty of the movement and the symbolism of the movement, is that when you hit that point where you need to exhale, use your body, contract and squeeze as much as you can. Lengthen your spine as if you were fighting to continue holding your breath, as if you were holding on with your muscles to the retention. And you're going to find you can have a second or 2 seconds or 3 seconds more of that retention. So you're just building that intensity, increasing dharana, increasing supreme focus. And then you exhale. The belly empties. You're still lengthening your spine. Pull the belly in and keep squeezing. Physically, very, very physical. Tightening the muscles and contracting. Again, same point. As if you were using your muscular body to hold on to the retention. And we'll just do this for a couple rounds. The last, sort of breath we take in this shape is an inhale. And it's like, okay, this is my last retention for this session. I'm just going to give it my all my suffering, all my pain. My relationship to the CO2 and to this acidity is misperception. Everything is divine. Everything is good. Why is this good? Because it's increasing my sense of focus and my relationship to pure consciousness. You're holding, squirming because you want to breathe, but you don't want to breathe. When you need to exhale, exhale, release your wrists to your knees, assume your posture. At that point, meditation begins. At that point is when you actually start to meditate. Until then, you're just acknowledging that you need to meditate because you still perceive suffering in the world and you are collecting enough energy to escape that perception, right? So much feedback about this technique is that it's hard and it's painful, the misperception of a sensation. And then you're sitting there and your body slingshots back into homeostasis. Everything is normal. And that happens in a second, something to appreciate. And then you're just feeling, right? And so do your best to just feel that buzzing aliveness, the beauty, the comfort, the pleasure of what is regular. And from time to time, when the mind does start to spiral out into thoughts, think of KAIVALYA, think of something philosophical to at least anchor you into, the expansiveness of a meditator's mind versus spiraling out into what you have to do today or, what you want to do later, something like that. Cool, so I hope this all makes sense, and then I'll cue you through the hands to heart center as we always do, but this is essentially sort of the breakdown of the entire process. And we're going to do this together, essentially unguided for the next 4 sessions, a couple more details to learn, but this is our final week, so, good work, and let's get into this ritual. Beautiful. Alrighty. Tall spine. Wrists rest on knees. Eyes are closed. Spread your fingers very wide. Take a second and attempt to feel the vibratory sensation. Slow down the breath. Bring a random finger to each thumb. And now acknowledge suffering in your life. If there is no suffering, acknowledge the reality that suffering does exist. Maybe it's so subtle that it bubbles underneath consciousness, which is awesome. It means you're happy. But it's there. And if there's obvious suffering, obvious worry, financial worry, relationship worry, identity crisis, acknowledge the detail. And so its eyes suffer, and that is natural and inescapable. Until someone escapes the mind. And so the secondary thought is, this suffering is the consequence of my perceptions, and if I am not perceiving all things as divine, as supremely good, as wondrous and magical, then I am misperceiving. And so you're essentially holding yourself accountable to a false view, false in relationship to mystical perspective. How do we escape the gravity of our misperception? We need energy. We need prana. And so prepare yourself right off the bat. Maximum intensity. Inhale as long as you can. Hold as long as you can. Exhale as slowly as you can. Hold as long as you can. Let certain elements of your technique's etiquette crumble because we're prioritizing length and intensity. All right, here we go. About 12 minutes. With your next inhale, inhale your arms up and overhead. Remember, dramatically graceful. Interlace all of your fingers, index fingers point up to the sky. Next inhale. Shiva Mudra, the hand gesture. Shiva is the Lord of yoga, the first person in history to explore the mind and trek beyond it. In that he represents the perfect practitioner that is immune to the perceptions of the mind, immune to fear, immune to doubt, immune to worry. He is a practitioner that only sees divinity. And so use this posture, your physical body, to hold on to your retentions just a second or 2 seconds longer. Notice that as everything builds, as the lightning strike of suffocation hits you, there is nothing but that moment. A couple rounds here, arms staying up and over the head, shoulder blades away from the skull. Open the chest forward, pull the belly in. Let this be your last internal retention. Lungs are full. This is your last round. Hold the breath as long as possible. When you must exhale, with dramatic grace, let your arms return down, wrists plant on knees, and feel your body slingshot back into homeostasis, the bliss of regularity. At this point, meditation has begun. Only feel. No perception. No influence from false preference sets. Only feeling. When the mind does wander, think of KAIVALYA. Think of how alone you are within yourself and how beautiful that is. That only you can experience this moment. Only you can see the world from where you stand. There should be mental quiet. A unique absence of inner dialogue. From here, just listen to your environment. Let it come in unobstructed. Slow down your breath. Feel that it's as if a few of hundreds of veils have been lifted off the psyche. And in that, the world beyond those veils is a bit more clearly defined. That regular sounds and the regularity of this moment is, for whatever reason, more enriching and more satisfying. So that supreme goodness that defines divinity is more accessible. Bring your hands to heart center. Again, dramatic grace and sincerity. Soften your face. And so all of this is a gift we give ourselves. This point of view. The same reason we seek nature, the same reason we seek love. It's an attempt to see more clearly and to perceive more effectively. Thumb knuckles to third eye center. As always, focus on the thumbs pressing on the skin of the forehead. Do your best to focus purely on that and start to notice as other parts of the body blur out. All of this is the disciplining of the mind. And in doing so, we learn to articulate our neurology the same way a ballerina knows how to articulate her body. The same way a singer knows how to articulate her lungs and her respiratory system and her vocal cords. An articulation of the mind. Try to focus a little more. Notice that you can. And release your wrists to your knees. And with a breath in, slowly open the eyes. That same dramatic grace. Stay in a meditative state for a few breaths. Dilate your pupils, blink your eyes, feel it wash away. Something like a dream. And repeat in the mind, I am no longer meditating. Now I am pulled back out into the world, back out into my preference sets, back out into the things I must do.